I didn't wake up one day deciding to become someone else. It was slower than that. I live in the United States, in a medium-sized city, the kind that doesn't impress anyone, but works. Wide streets, supermarkets open late, people who don't want to know about your life. I like that. I like it a lot. I live alone, pay my bills, walk to work. But it wasn't always like this. I grew up in a family where everything came with a manual. What to wear, who to talk to, when to smile. A family that talked a lot about values, tradition, name, especially the name. The last name was almost a living entity. It weighed more than any person inside that house. From a young age, I knew I wasn't the right son. This was never said out loud, but it didn't need to be. You just had to observe. My older brother was the finished project. I remember long dinners. My father talking about the family business, about numbers, about growth, about legacy. My mother nodding along, always at the same rhythm. And me there, pushing food around my plate, thinking about anything else. When I said I didn't want to continue in the family business, it was as if I had confessed to a crime. I was in my early 20s, but in that moment I became a child again. Not in the sense of being cared for, in the sense of being punished. They spoke as if I were spitting on everything they had built, as if my decision were a personal attack, not a professional choice. I tried to explain. I swear I tried. I said it didn't make sense for me to dedicate my life to something that would never truly be mine, that the succession was already decided, that I would always be the assistant, the temporary substitute, never the real leader. My father listened with that hard silence, the kind that always meant the conversation was over before it even began. My mother cried but didn't defend me. She never did. That night, I slept badly. I remember staring at the ceiling, trying to imagine what it would be like to actually leave. Thinking about leaving was always easy. The hard part was accepting that if I left, there would be no coming back. When they told me that if I left, I would no longer be part of the family and that I would have to give up their last name, I accepted, out of exhaustion. I was tired of fighting against an entire system. Changing my name was more symbolic than practical. A form, a few signatures, a new document. But inside, it felt like a silent funeral. I buried a version of myself that had never had a choice, and at the same time, I felt relief, an almost guilty relief. I moved shortly after. I crossed states with a simple plan: work, learn, depend on no one. In the first few months, everything felt too small. The apartment was small, the paycheck was small. My confidence was tiny, but it was mine. Every detail of it. I worked for other people at first, making a lot of mistakes, listening more than talking. Sometimes in the middle of the workday, a memory would hit me without warning. My father correcting my posture, my mother saying that something didn't look good, my brother being praised for doing exactly what I would have been criticized for even trying. Those memories came quickly and left quickly. Short, contradictory thoughts. Over time, I started building something new. Not just a career, but an identity. A name that didn't come loaded with expectations. People who knew me for what I did, not for what I represented. For the first time, when someone asked who I was, the answer didn't come with a heavy last name at the end. I didn't look for news about them. I didn't ask about anyone. I existed outside that system. My life didn't turn into a success story overnight. The days started to take shape, waking up early. An office that wasn't beautiful but was functional. I liked that. I liked knowing exactly where everything was. As the years passed, a coworker and I started talking more. Simple conversations at first. Complaints about bosses. Ideas thrown out half as a joke. Then those ideas started coming back. First on napkins, then in shared documents, then in meetings that no longer felt like a joke. When we decided to open our own company, no one clapped. There was no dramatic announcement or emotional goodbye. I just left my job, cleared out my desk, and went home with a strange mix of fear and relief. The same feeling I had when I left my family years earlier. The company grew in the most irritating way possible. Slowly, but consistently. Nothing viral, nothing spectacular. Satisfied clients, renewed contracts, quiet referrals. Growth that only the people inside really notice. Until the day someone on the outside notices too. That was when a trade magazine asked to interview us. I almost said no, not out of humility, out of trauma. Exposure had always made me uncomfortable, but I agreed. I sat in front of a small camera, answered questions about management, difficult decisions, mistakes. I talked about work, not my personal life. I thought it would end there. It didn't. In the weeks that followed, people I hadn't spoken to in years started showing up in curious ways. An old school acquaintance sent me a vague message saying they had seen something interesting. A distant relative reacted to one of my professional posts with exaggerated enthusiasm. Small things, polite things. I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the world doesn't revolve around me, that small success doesn't attract anyone's attention. I kept my routine, meetings, quick lunches, short walks in the late afternoon to clear my head. It was on an ordinary night, around 8 p.m., that I saw the email. The sender was an address I didn't immediately recognize. The text, however, was impossible to mistake. Too polite, too formal, too affectionate for people who had erased me from their existence for more than a decade. They said they missed me, that they had been following my journey from afar, that they were proud. The word proud almost made me laugh out loud, alone in the kitchen. Almost. They talked about reconnection, about family, about correcting mistakes from the past. And of course they talked about the name, the last name. They said maybe it was time for me to return to who I really was. I read that email 3 times. What I felt wasn't emotion. It was irritation. I replied in the same polite tone. Short. I said I didn't see any need for contact, that my life was fine as it was, that I had no interest in revisiting the past. I sent it and closed the computer. I stood there for a few minutes, feeling that old conflict. One part of me wondered if I was being too harsh. Another remembered exactly why I had left. The next morning, there was another message, a little less formal, a little more insistent. They asked for my phone number, my address. They said they wanted to talk in person, as if it were a favor I should accept. That's when I realized they weren't asking, they were advancing. Update 1. After that, the attempts became more frequent. Not aggressive, not yet, but constant. A distant cousin asking for just a coffee. An aunt I barely remembered saying she needed to clear some things up. It was as if everyone had received the same script, carefully rehearsed to sound spontaneous. I started to feel mentally exhausted. The sensation was like being pulled back to a place I had left with a lot of effort. I started sleeping badly again, waking up in the middle of the night with short, confused thoughts. Why now? Why right now? I kept working, pretending normality. But something had changed. The calm I had built started to crack, and deep down, I knew it was only just beginning. I had always known the problem wasn't the email, or the polite messages. The real problem would start when they stopped asking for permission. It took a few weeks, but it happened. It was on an ordinary afternoon. I had left work early because I had a headache. When I turned the corner onto my street, I saw a car parked illegally. I didn't recognize the model, but something in me was immediately suspicious. I went into the building trying to look normal, greeted the doorman, waited for the elevator. When the doors opened on my floor, I heard voices. The voices. I didn't need to see them to know. They were there, standing in the hallway, in front of my door. My first impulse was to turn around and leave. Pretend I hadn't seen anything. Go back down. Get in the car. But anger came before fear. A hot, immediate anger that pushed my body forward. They smiled when they saw me. Rehearsed smiles. Smiles from people who think they're doing something beautiful. They said my old name. The last name came with it. Heavy, out of place. They asked how I was. Said they wanted to talk. That they had come in peace. That none of this had to be so difficult. I felt my hands shake, but my voice came out steady. I said I hadn't authorized that visit. I said they needed to leave. They didn't. They started speaking louder. Not aggressive, not yet, just insistent. My father talked about family. My mother talked about regret, about missing me, about how everything could be resolved if I cooperated. Other doors in the hallway started to open. Curious looks. That horrible feeling of being watched at the worst possible moment. I felt ashamed. Not of myself, but of the scene, of the complete lack of respect. I said clearly that if they didn't leave, I would call the police. They laughed, a short, disbelieving laugh, as if I were being dramatic, as if this were just another tantrum that would pass. I took out my phone right there. My decision was made. I called, explained, used simple words. Unauthorized people refusing to leave my property. When the officers arrived, questions, documents, clear requests for them to leave. My parents trying to explain, still in the same polite tone, that this was a family misunderstanding. It didn't work. They were escorted out. Not arrested, not handcuffed, but exposed, humiliated. I saw my father's face change when he realized he had no control over that situation. I saw my mother cry in a way that didn't move me, not even a little. When the building door finally closed behind them, I sat down on the hallway floor, leaning against the wall, trying to calm down. That night I didn't sleep. because something had broken. They knew where I lived now, and that changes everything. After that day, peace was completely gone. At first, the messages were spaced out. One here, another there. People I hadn't spoken to in years reappearing with that fake casualness that always gives away intention. Hey, I was thinking about you. I heard there was a misunderstanding. I think you can talk calmly. I read everything and didn't respond. Or I replied with short, neutral sentences, trying not to feed anything. But it was useless. At work, I pretended everything was normal. Smiled in meetings. Inside, I was on constant alert. Any notification on my phone made me hold my breath for a second longer than normal. Sometimes it was just a client. A distant cousin called me one morning while I was driving. She spoke as if she were doing me a favor, said my parents were devastated, that I had gone too far, that calling the police had been humiliating. The word humiliating came up several times during that call. Not once did she ask how I was. I hung up with my hand sweating. Part of me felt guilty. That old part, trained from early on to give in. Another part felt angry. The messages started to take on a more accusatory tone. They said I owed gratitude. That family is family. That I couldn't treat my own parents like dangerous strangers. That I was overreacting. I started questioning myself. Had calling the police been too much? Then I remembered them standing in my hallway. Remembered the feeling of having no way out. I still hadn't blocked anyone. Part of me wanted to see how far it would go. Another part still hoped, stupidly, that someone would say something different, something honest. That didn't happen. The family didn't want to listen. I was the cold one, ungrateful, radical. They were repentant parents trying to fix the past. That was when I realized this wasn't going to stop on its own. They weren't going to give up. And that's when they decided to send someone who knew exactly all of my weak points. Update 2. From my window, I recognized the car before I even saw who was inside. The crooked way it parked. The door slamming too hard. My brother. I hadn't seen him in person for over a decade. Even so, he looked exactly the same. The same inflated posture. The same look of someone who had always been certain he would be heard. He wasn't alone. His wife was with him, almost like a shadow. I stood still in the middle of the living room. My phone was on the table. He started knocking on the door. Not hard at first, then harder. He said he just wanted to talk, that it was ridiculous to handle things this way, that our parents were suffering. Always them. Always their suffering as the final argument. I opened the door after a long time, not out of fear, out of curiosity. I wanted to see how far he would go. The conversation started in an almost polite tone. He said he was there as a brother, talked about how our parents were sorry, said I needed to be the adult in the situation. I listened, but it was like watching a replayed movie. Them as victims, me as the problem. His wife stayed silent almost the entire time. Sitting, hands folded, attentive gaze. Sometimes, when he raised his voice a little, she lightly touched his arm. A small gesture, but constant. When I said, very clearly, that I had no interest in speaking with our parents, the mask fell. His face changed. His voice got louder. His body stepped forward. He said I had always been ungrateful. That I had always liked playing the different one. That now I thought I was better than everyone else because I had money and recognition. That hit me less than he expected. What hit me was realizing that, even after so many years, he still needed to put me down to feel whole. He kicked a piece of furniture. Not hard enough to break it, but hard enough to intimidate. I took a step back. I told him he needed to leave immediately. He said he wouldn't until I promised to talk to our parents. During the argument, old words came back. Teenage insults. Him calling me selfish, me calling him a coward. He took a step forward before I finished my sentence. The kind of movement from someone who always believed his size solved any fight. His body came toward mine. What he didn't know, because we had been apart for years, was that I had been training jiu-jitsu for a long time, black belt. When he tried to push me, I stepped into his space instead of backing away. I used his weight against him and took both of us to the ground. The impact was sharp. Before he understood what was happening, I already had his arm trapped, his body immobilized, all his strength reduced to nothing. He started cursing, then struggling. His wife asked me to let him go, said they would leave, promised, repeated it more than once. I let go. He stayed on the ground longer than necessary, then got up too fast, pride wounded and face red, came at me again. This time without a single word, just anger. There was no discussion. I locked in a rear naked choke almost in the same movement he tried to grab me. I felt his body losing strength, then giving in completely. In a few seconds, he passed out. I dragged him into the hallway outside, breathing but unconscious. I picked up their car keys that had fallen during the struggle, tossed them near his wife, and told her that this was their last chance to leave without police, without an ambulance, without more trouble, and that when he woke up, they were to leave and never come back. She looked at me, scared. I locked the door, went down the stairs, and went to my company. After my brother's visit, I spent a few days waiting for the next attack. Another call, another visit, another well-intentioned intermediary. I was already mentally prepared to change addresses again, tell only a handful of people, start over once more if necessary. It wouldn't have been the first time. But the next move didn't come from me. It came from them. First came the vague comments on social media. Nothing direct, nothing that mentioned my name, just vague posts about betrayal, about families being destroyed by ingratitude, about children who forget where they came from. I saw everything without reacting. I didn't like, comment, or respond. I had already learned that silence is sometimes the most offensive thing you can offer. A few days later, someone sent me a short, almost awkward message asking if I had seen the mess. I hadn't, not yet. That's when everything came out at once. My brother's wife filed for divorce. Not discreetly, not quietly. She made everything public on social media. Serious accusations, photos, affairs, things impossible to ignore. Suddenly, the man who had always been treated as untouchable and an example became a problem no one could hide. And along with him came the family business. The name they had protected so fiercely started appearing associated with words that had never been part of their vocabulary. Violence, abuse, tax evasion, cover-ups. The company, which had always been the center of everything, became a target. Comments, criticism, people asking how that environment had been allowed for so long. My parents tried to control the narrative at first. Cold statements, generic phrases, attempts to separate the personal case from the company crisis. It didn't work. The pressure escalated too fast. Within a few days, they announced that my brother was no longer part of the business, that they repudiated that kind of behavior, that they were shocked. No one fully believed it. The damage was already done. Not long after, the news came that they were selling the company. Before the value dropped even further, before the name became unviable, that company that had always been more important than any person in that house was being handed over to strangers. When I found out, I felt neither joy nor sadness. I received one last email from my parents. Short, no drama, saying they understood my decision, that they would no longer try to contact me, that they regretted how everything had ended. I read it once and deleted it. I didn't reply, not because I had nothing to say, but because I had already said everything, many times over many years, and had never been heard. A few weeks later, the one who reached out to me was my brother's ex-wife. She didn't come with drama or detours. She said she needed to clear her conscience before moving on. She was direct. My brother's plan was never reconciliation or family or remorse. The idea was to use me as a bridge, bring me closer to our parents through him, and from there ask for money to try to plug the hole he himself had opened in the company. Money siphoned off over the years, taxes evaded, accounts manipulated until there was nothing left to hide. According to her, when he realized I wouldn't give in, that I wanted no contact at all, the whole performance collapsed. He couldn't handle being rejected by me the way he had never been rejected by anyone, and the frustration turned into aggression. She only discovered the full extent of everything later, when she found proof of the affair and, along with it, documents, conversations, and numbers that didn't add up. That was when she decided to expose everything. Not for me, for herself, because carrying that silence had already cost too much. It was in that same conversation that she said something that reorganized a lot inside me. She told me that, contrary to what I had always believed, my parents talked about me often. They asked how I was, whether my brother had any news. According to her, my parents' desire to reconnect with me had never disappeared. My brother told them he had seen me, that I said I didn't want to know anything about anyone, that I had been clear, harsh, definitive. He lied and said I had told him I never wanted to see them again, that any attempt at reaching out would be humiliating for my parents, and that it was better not to try. She realized he was afraid of me coming back, and of losing the position he held as a son and in the company. Hearing that didn't bring me comfort. It brought a bitter clarity. Today, my life goes on. Not perfect, not immune to problems, but mine. The apartment is still the same. The work is still exhausting. I don't celebrate their fall, but I don't go back either. Everyone there made choices. I made mine. Some stories don't end with forgiveness. They end with distance, and sometimes that's the healthiest thing there is.